You know, through my roughly 2 years of content creation on both TikTok, Twitch, and potentially now YouTube, there's always been one question plaguing my mind. What the hell am I doing with AbyssFiles? Let's take it back to the beginning. On December 5th of 2022, picture this. You're bored out of your mind, you're binging through YouTube, you see hundreds of horror stories sitting on YouTube. And unlike many fans of analog horror, those dedicated people who make those twisted nightmares and stories, I had a thought that no person in their sane mind would think. What if I did this as a joke? The first week, I expected nothing to happen. Boy, how wrong I was. The first real lore-based video I made for AbyssFiles was titled Faceless. Do note, at the time of making that, I was absolutely horrible with TikTok, and I did not have CapCut at the time. So at first, I relied on filters. Oh, dear God, did they help a bit. For example, in order to play multiple characters, I had to do a lot of cutting, and especially for an early creator and a guy who didn't know jack shit about analog horror, I admit I did pretty decent. I'm gonna pull it up. Okay, so let me sum up some details that were missed when people first viewed this that literally no one has found to this day. Let me roll back the clip a minute. That is actually the first instance of one of my monsters. This creature is honestly, I think, one of my really coolest creations. It's called the Static. It's a creature that is literally just television and radio static. Like, is that? But when you hear it, it'll slowly... Once you hear it, it'll slowly degrade your mental ability to... It'll basically devolve you into your base instincts for survival. Basically causing those affected to be prone to violence, and they'll lash out at others before dropping dead from brain death. I admit, a week in, I planted these ideas by accident. I actually did not have that Static character when I made that. That was coincidentally what caused me to make the character. Happy little accidents. Thank you so much, Bob Ross. Moving on. The next video I posted was called Emergency Broadcast. Heavily inspired by Local 58. Highly, really well done. The guy who made Local 58, man, you have my respect. Wait a minute. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah, I was getting to the murder. Honestly, now that I'm looking back at all the stuff I've done for this while making this video, there was one video that is kind of my anchor point for this entire series. It's a video titled The Serpent. It's honestly one of my favorites. Mainly because it was really the one where I actually put a lot of dedication into. Rolling the clip. Oh, and, epilepsy warning. Epilepsy warning. Now this one is mainly up to interpretation on what it meant. For me personally, when I was making it, it was actually meant to be a nod to what started it all. Because later on, when I was making AbyssFiles and all of that, I started kind of siloing videos into arcs of the story. This was Arc 1. The beginning of the story. Well, beginning isn't really the right word because, it's been more complicated than that. But we'll get to that later. Now we're getting to the good stuff. Because for a bit, I took a bit of a hiatus. And I got better. Now, around this time in the story, I had been watching Vita Carnis, and also been reading a lot about SCPs and all of that. And I think that kind of affected how it kind of took the story. I started doing audio logs, like the found footage VHS tapes. Sort of. More like journal entries when I was starting out. I had to do all the voice acting myself, and around that time I discovered the voice filters. So I learned I could do multiple different characters. But while I was learning that, I needed to fill time and start adding a few creatures to the roster. After the faceless, I decided, hey, the mimics from Vita Carnis were actually really cool in design. But you know what I did? I made these abominations. And him. We don't talk about him. He literally shows up once and then never again. Didn't even bother to name the piece of Anyway, these Slenderman-looking abominations are called the Whispers. I'm not really going to explain what they do. You all can just look at the Google site. I document so much what they do. Main point being is I started making audio logs of this organization. Blackhound. I hadn't called it that yet. They didn't really have a name at the time. So they basically were just documenting what they were finding. And that went on for a few weeks. Then I dropped the big gun. Now, when I released Incident Report, it's where the lore was finally starting to unfold. And honestly, where I went with it was really just to introduce everyone to realize that, hey, holy crap, there's actual story here. Because at that point, I'd been getting so many views, but I hadn't been getting likes and all of that. Like, I hadn't been getting engagement. So I decided to up my game. Because at that point, I had just gotten CapCut. And I decided to go nuts. honestly, and personally for me, it's one of my big achievements, where I really started putting effort into the ARG. Because at that point, it had gotten beyond just the one-off joke I intended. I actually started taking interest in the lore and world building I had made. And, well, I only kept going. Because note, in the beginning, I hadn't really been thinking of, like, an overarching plot. I had just been posting stuff to be creepy. But Incident Report is where the game changed. I started introducing human characters. Arthur Williams, who, honestly, was really just a narrator for the story at first. But then I started trying to flesh him out, giving him personal thoughts, details, background, all that jazz. And I started to really like the character. I also introduced Anomaly 1, or, as I jokingly call him, the Lycanthrope. Also, I make a joke that he's my OC in this universe. And afterwards, I started branching out more, working on, like, lore. I even took a bit of a break from posting and all that, because I had been doing it, like, every week or so, like, 2 a week. Then I decided to take a bit of a monthly break in order to, get an idea of where I wanted to go with this story. So I started thinking about building off the, Incident Report. I had rewatched it, like, 12 times. And decided to go with... He's one of the scientists working at Blackhound. His brother, the director of the site, and he decides to go off on his own to figure out what the hell is going on, because all of this centers around West Wolf City. I admit, I really wish I chose a different name, because I also use that for my, Cyberwolf character, lore and all that, because this city is also West Wolf City. Then started having an existential crisis, and realizing I was contradicting myself, and did any of this really matter? Am I really just talking to a wall? Is anyone even listening? Please God, somebody answer! Yeah, existential crisis aside, I started focusing on branching out the lore. After Arthur, I started working on members of Blackhound. The female voice I had been using for, like, some of the documentation, because I had realized that I made a mistake of using multiple different voices and, like, voice filters for the audio logs, and I realized, oh crap, those characters need names and backstories. So that's how you got
Jason Quireman.
And
Jennifer Harrison.
Also,
Henry Williams.
Henry is basically just Arthur, but more serious. And depressed. Like me! Please, this is a cry for help. Man, I really need to think of something better than the cutaway gag. It's getting annoying. No! Bad editor. Bad editor Wolf. No stick bug. I swear to God, editor me. Anyway. After I created, Jennifer and Jason... sounds weird to say out loud. Started branching out the story a bit. After adding more human characters, I started shaping the monsters to be more unnerving. And that's where we get... Now, these 2 videos in question were probably my scariest ones, in my personal opinion. Because, in truth, those 2 videos introduce 2 of the most disturbing characters I've had. The Catacombs introduced the Sightless. And they are disturbing. Specifically for this one, I had the help of an AI, tool. I know AI is usually frowned upon, but I mainly used it to fill in gaps that I didn't know how to do. No, AI is somewhat frowned upon in this day and age, but I used it as a tool. If you can see, most of the design, it looks AI, but a lot of it isn't. The only real part that is somewhat AI is the background, the ear, and the mouth. The rest was just me with a really good photoshopping. Because if there's one thing I'm good at, it's making things look as disturbing as possible. Their whole gimmick is they can't see, and they make you unable to see. Because their bodies absorb light so well then they basically are a cloud of darkness and make the room around you pitch black, as well as paralyzing you with fear. It taps into that fear of not knowing what's happening. And what I think I did a really good choice in doing is putting them in a catacomb. You know, like the crypts and all of that, like with the skulls lining the walls and all of that. Because one, caves are dark. And you wouldn't notice if the world around you got darker, would you? Have fun sleeping tonight. The girl, specifically, was made to tap into the original fear the Faceless had. Because the Faceless have two forms. When you saw in the original video, that may need a bit of context I forgot to bring up earlier, which I am not re-editing. I do not want to redo this. I do not do scripts. The Faceless have two forms. The first being what you are seeing on screen, and the other is what happens when they assimilate a victim. Because when they do that, they devour them, but then they take their face, and the only way you can discern the difference between a regular person and them is the pitch black eyes. Well, I took that fear from the Faceless and put it in the girl, and then cranked it up to 11. The freaking creature could speak, and its voice, oh, I did well. We're made to be a creature that is capable of negotiating, but is almost sociopathic in the way they talk to people. As if they know something you don't.
While also sounding like this.
Oh god, I'm not gonna sleep tonight, am I? Now, I intend to break this into 2 to 3 parts, or 3 videos. So consider this part 1. I'm gonna end this off with a few notes. 1. The analog horror is still ongoing, so if you want to check it out, you can. It's Blackhound AbyssFiles. Really good. Highly recommend. Gotten a lot better over the time. I've only scratched the surface of what I've been doing. This isn't really an explanatory video on the lore and all of that. It's mainly the process of me making it. Of what I was doing while I was doing in the early years. Because I want you to all note, the TikTok and the YouTube are technically, they may appear to be the same videos, but the YouTube one is slightly different. So I would advise watching through them all. Might find something interesting. Well, I want to end it off by saying, just considering this is probably going to be my first video I post on YouTube, I don't want it to be mainly about AbyssFiles. Because, well, I've already focused on that a bit too much. I don't want to fully be the analog horror guy. I also want to talk about games and other stuff like that. So any suggestions for how I can improve videos like these would be highly recommended and helpful to me as a creator. If anyone ever sees this. God, it's gonna be a nightmare to animate. Hey, after animation, Cyber. Leave your thoughts now.